Dr. Manu Bazzano is an author, psychotherapist, supervisor in private practice with a background in philosophy and rock music. He's an internationally recognized lecturer and facilitator. He studied Eastern contemplative practices since 1980, and in 2004 was ordained in the Soto and Rinzai tradition of Zen Buddhism. He is a visiting tutor at Cambridge University and Goldsmith College, and his latest book is called Subversion and Desire, Pathways to Trans-Individuation. Welcome, Manu.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
So Manu and I are talking about Aaron Manning, actually, and we, in our shared respect, about Aaron and her husband, Brian.
Masumi.
How do you Masumi? Yeah. And by a curious twist of fate, she was in the first episode of the Boundless Body instead of you, Manu. But we've been warmed up. We've been warmed up to the situation, and we get to have take two.
Wonderful.
So here we go.
That's what the gods are with us today.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's see here. My current writing in my own book, Visionary Somatics, is I just literally quoted you yesterday morning when I was writing.
Okay.
And it comes from your latest work, this Pathways to Trans-Individuation work. I believe it's in that text that you bring a critique to attachment theory.
Yes, that's right.
Which I just thought was just so wonderful. It's like you're this Southern Italian flair. You're from Southern Italy, right?
I am Calabria, to be precise. I mean, I left 1985. Never to go back, but I'm still in the blood somewhere. In my limbs.
It's still in the blood. You got this passionate, transgressive way of writing that really spoke to me. Mm-hmm. Originally, I ran into your work in heretical perspectives on Zen, something like that. Zen and therapy is one of your books.
Heretical. Yeah. That's right. Heretical, yeah.
Yep. And you had this term called feral philosophy, which we'll come back to later, but that's how I got introduced to your work. But I love your transgressive spirit. And it shows up very much in your critique on attachment theory, which I just found it to be such a relief, just like somebody that's out there that's not just taking it as an unassailable truth.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can take us down that road a little bit about like why write a chapter called Against Attachment Theory? That's a transgressive statement in this era.
Yeah. Well, it started for me simply as a critical discussion and appreciation of attachment theory. I mean, critique of anything is, for me, it's appreciation, first of all, because I actually read and study and reflect on it. And there were many things which made sense in terms of, obviously, it's nice for the child growing up and having a close, loving, caring contact with their caregivers. And we have to remember John Bowlby, who put it together, was also reacting against a sort of a public school regime in terms of, kids will be sent off, a certain English way of understanding upbringing. So it all sounds good, and it is. It's only when you look closely that many aspects come to the fore. For one thing, John, as a result of attachment theory, it pushed responsibility for upbringing back to women, and the child needs this loving mother, Obviously, say, okay, it sounds very good, sounds very nice, but there is a lot of pressure on mothers having to perform in a certain way, having to be nurturing and caring and loving and reinforcing old gender stereotypes. And when I raised some of the questions to people who are, the current representatives of attachment theory, at least in the UK, you'd say, "Oh well, it's not just the family; it takes a village to raise a child." But the reality, particularly now with the neoliberal advanced capitalism, the situations we are in, the reality is that raising children can become is a mixed thing, and often to reinforce those stereotypes can be deleterious. So I looked around and I looked and I noticed this fact that in every, I don't know in other countries, but definitely in the UK, whatever the orientation, whether you study Jungian analysis, whether you train to be a psychoanalyst in the Freudian tradition, whether you are humanistic, person-centered, and so forth, attachment theory is the ground. And on attachment theory, then is built this notion of relational psychological work between practitioner and patient or client, which pretty much echoes, if not replicates, the model of good parenting. Even when you, and this is more your field, and in, I am a little bit of an outsider there, when it comes to neuroaffectivity, neuropsychoanalysis, ideas from neuroscience, again, this connection between left brain and left brain, the child and the caregiver, is still based on those ideas that the relation, the psychotherapeutic, psychological relation, has to replicate those models. So it's all good. And how I had the opposite reaction to yours when I actually advertised the talk against attachment theory. I got a lot of flack on social media. Say, how can anyone possibly even dream of having to say anything critical about attachment theory? So when there is a forceful reaction, that something is up. But to cut a long story short, okay, so of course, a good loving bond with primary caregiver is an important thing. But there are two things there. The attachment styles, the phenomena connected to the attachment styles have been solidified into secure, insecure, and all the rest of it into fixed category. And it's almost like with astrology, I have a lot of respect for astrology, in fact, but it becomes almost a joke. Oh, of course, you are a Piscean, so that means so and so. Oh, of course, I can see that the way you behave and the way you are in a relationship.
How'd you know I was a Pisces, Manu?
Well, I am too. St. Patrick.
Same school of fish.
Yeah. So, it becomes fixed. And second thing, which something that Deleuze and Guattari bring, we forget the other element, the line of flight, that there is something to be learned in the state of the existential and factual state of abandonment, that we learn something when we move away, or circumstances in upbringing sometimes moves us away from that close bond. That there is something that we learn in that space of where there is existential pressure, existential crisis, to reform by ourselves a dwelling. And so that's forgotten, and it's assumed that always this loving bond is the be all and end all, and that's in a very simplistic way the critique. And you could say people like Laplanche and later Judith Butler would argue that the other thing attachment theory has succeeded in doing, it completely biologized the sexuality. So there is no longer a sense that there is a current of, can I even say this, an erotic current, not in the sense of overtly erotic, not in the sense of abuse, but in the sense of a current that is transmitted from parent, caregiver to child, which is the essence of unconscious life, which has those remnants, elements of the mystery of the erotic in the wide sense of induction into the wonder and the mystery of coming to life. It has biologized sexuality, and it almost ejected it from the current psychological discourse. We shouldn't forget that Bowlby was, really Bowlby's creation is a mixture of Darwinism and object relations. And object relations, I don't know in the US or other countries, but in the UK, object relations reigns supreme, is the only view. And I would have a lot to say on object relations too, but I don't want to complicate the discourse, but I hope it makes sense.
If you enjoy the content, please subscribe, like us, and share. Dr. B offers a dynamic blend of therapeutic maps, modalities to help you catalyze, stabilize, and thrive. Book a session or free consultation at www.somaticdoctor.com.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And, that focus on desire with a capital D is something that I admire about your work. It fits well with it vibes with this fiery Southern Italy thing you got in your blood, and it's Deleuzian desire. And when I'm thinking about the attachment matrix, what you focus on in terms of your critique is this almost obsession with establishing the secure base.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's only one part of the show. The other part of the show is exploration. It's the desire. Let's underline and highlight the word desire with a capital letter D. The desire to innovate, the desire to adventure, the desire to create, the desire to explore, the desire to have wonder, the desire to just expand into new possibilities, right? And by over-focusing on establishing the secure base, and Aaron Manning and I were talking about this in the first episode, that this is really prevalent in California in particular, where there's this kind of what I call the imperialization of the slow.
Right.
So that you have these trauma resolution communities that basically, the monolith is establishing the secure base. And in order to establish the secure base, to release the trauma and to do all of the things that are shown in the literature to have a good result in terms of trauma resolution and the establishment of safety, what can happen is this kind of micro-fascistic, when we'll talk about micro-fascism again this time because it's quite interesting, these rules that are almost like, almost like a militant safety.
Yes, I mean, there's some people would call it euphoric security, as if euphoric safety, safety, almost as if our job as practitioners is to say, look, don't worry, you are okay, everything is okay, everything is fine, and sometimes we need to do just that, but often it means confirming the status quo. So don't worry, there won't be any rupture, there won't be any crisis here, but also there won't be any change. And also the other idea about desire, capital D is important, is not craving, but desire I mean, Nietzsche would call it will to power, in the sense of desire to actualize, to become more than we are. Power is in life force, to become more or who we can be. And so that's important. And thank you for mentioning trauma, because the discourse there seems to be, first we have to heal the trauma, which is really a wild goose chase. And then you can start living. The idea is to, one important question in our work, I think it could be, what is your desire? What would you do if you didn't have this particular rupture at the core of your being, so to speak? What would you do? And in acting, in activating desire, things come together and things crystallize. So desire will be the unifying force. We don't need the mollycoddling, the healing, the illusory healing of the trauma before we can start living, if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, I think there can be, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I think there can be kind of a...
I don't want to look down on the real pain and the real trauma people experience, but it's how do we approach it? That's the question. And do we give the illusion that it can be completely solved?
Yeah, one of the extraordinary books on trauma that is underrepresented is called Trauma Tragedy Therapy. And that's by a man named Stephen Levine, not Peter Levine, the trauma science guy. There's another guy named Stephen Levine who's looking at that there used to be a kind of a drama therapy in ancient ritual and theater practices that would take the tragedy of trauma and purify the community through drama, essentially. And there's a way that desire to purify through drama, the desire to purify through drama and connect with this sort of collective grieving element that can heal people has been, in my judgment, impoverished by this kind of biological framework that kind of collapses the mystery and the grandness of the cosmos, and even biology itself is grand. To me, that's the best thing about science. It connects me with the grandness and wonder of the universe, but it can do the opposite. It can collapse and reduce the beauty and the grandness of everything, including the great traumas in life. I mean, there's been great traumas throughout evolution. For example, the cyanobacteria apocalypse, right? Which was this enormous oxygenation event on planet Earth, a billion years ago or whatever, where billions and trillions of bacteria died and produced oxygen, that was toxic at the time. But that was the seed of chaos that gave a possibility for new life. So I think it can be an impoverishment to just kind of collapse the mysteries of the universe and the mysteries of human relationship to parental upbringing, which the Jungians, you and I share a critical appreciation of Jung and his work too. The Jungians are fierce about this, a lot of them, that we can't just collapse all of our suffering into our autobiography.
Yeah.
Into our parental upbringing. Otherwise, the collective unconscious gets congested. It's like we can't just... There's a bigger story at play here, and if we collapse it into just biology, then the biology and the trauma discourse and so on, we lose a lot.
Yeah, there's something quite uncanny there, because I am a sort of amateur practitioner of an art form called Butoh, Butoh, it's a Japanese movement. And I was doing a workshop with a teacher I really respect here in London, Marie-Gabrielle Roti. And we're working with costumes and with allowing things to emerge in our movement. And I had, without going into too personal details, I had and still ongoing health struggle. And what came up during my movement was the illness. And so I gave it a name, and I started moving and became this thing. It was very, very powerful and moving, and to do it in front of others and have the support, the feedback of others was incredible. I still want to make sense of it, and I'm not saying that was the way to healing, but there was something very moving, and the confirmation that I can be with it, with a crisis, in a different way, that I can even take it for a walk and move and dance, not as in sort of, you could call it dance, but it's a particular form. So there is something to that. Rather than this false promise to, in relation to attachment theory, to heal the trauma. I think I want to stress this. My sense is that attachment theory, and I don't want to get stuck there, but it's an interesting hypothesis, and what a pity that it has become such a dogma, that it restricts the exploration, that there is more to the human spirit, more resources to the human spirit than simply mending and licking our wounds. There is more to psychological, psychotherapeutic, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, exploration than simply mending. It's not at all. It's more than DIY.
Yeah. So I'm writing about this enormously influential and voluminous set of books called the Norton series on interpersonal neurobiology.
Okay.
And it's a series of about 80 texts now, that I believe is a Zeitgeist for propagating the secure base. And the secure base that you and I have been talking about here is a zone of capture. I believe that's a way that we could say that it's a zone of right. And maybe we can talk about Pharaoh philosophy, because how to avoid capture is one of the sections that you write about. But so in this series, the Norton series, you have two authors, Alan Shore and Daniel Siegel, two prominent neuroscientists that are in a way kind of like adherents to what has been called McMindfulness.
Indeed, that's the wrong person. My friend and colleague. Yeah.
So like a kind of neo-Buddhistic framework that basically asserts, hey, everybody, calm down, slow down, stop being so intense, because that's where the healing is. So we need to self-regulate and co-regulate and make sure that everything happens quite slow, so that things don't unravel. But in the early days of this series, I was just reviewing the material this morning. Yeah. Basically said the amplification of positive states, okay, is just as important as being able to self-regulate. So amplification is an image of drama. It's an image that shows up in the arts, like dance and stuff like that. what are we going to do with these intensities if we're just constantly trying to capture them in a secure base?
I mean, you're really, as we say around here, hit the nail on the head. You're hitting the nail on the head. The question, I think it was asked beautifully and very personally by Nietzsche already. What do we do in relation to the current of life itself, the intensity of life that when it hits the prism of our body-mind? Sometimes I'm kind of sympathetic to the desire to regulate it, because I think it comes from fear that the intensity could destroy us. But that's also the stance of the ego self. I want to keep my little domain intact, and these intensities, which they are now called affect. I think it's a good word to describe it. Without being affected by the intensity of life, can we call our existence living? What if we manage to regulate what Nietzsche would call these magnificent monsters? These Proust would call them upheavals of thought. These very powerful emotions and feelings, which are a cluster of things: desire, sexual desire, anger, deep, profound sadness. How this is an ongoing dance. How can we dance with these magnificent monsters without being crushed, but also without having them safely domesticated? Because there would be it's another tragedy. We would then become what some analysts would call the normotic state. I will become so normal, so even and level-headed, so normal that actually it's a form of craziness. There is no longer this struggle with the intensities, which is the basis for creative life. I think among my clients, the people who most really get this are people who are in some way involved with artistic endeavors in some form or other. It's really, it seems to be that you could call it a struggle with chaos or a struggle with life itself. But then creation doesn't have to be only about painting and writing songs or composing music or dancing. It could be creating oneself. But I guess I want to stress that it is a risky endeavor. And that's why it's so exciting. And, sometimes these forces, these intensities are overwhelming. And there are moments that I think, I want to be, just give me a sort of some good affect regulation. But the other part of me rebels, because I think, no, our work is not to be a psychic police. It's not our work.
Yeah.
It's to aid exploration and understanding. So
yeah, there's a lot of this kind of consciousness police and the linguistic police and the pacing police and really this kind of micro-fascism regimes. I really like how you blend Nietzsche with Buddhist thought. Like your book is called Buddha is Dead. One of your books is called Buddha is Dead, Nietzsche and the Dawn of European Zen. I just think that's transgressive just by itself to pair Buddhist inquiry with Nietzsche. Nietzsche is often seen as this kind of this figure of chaos, this famous quote of his, like, one must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a rising star. Whereas Buddha is an image of serenity, often just like this deep kind of secure base, right? We could see, and to blend these two just seems very radical to me. You want to say more about how you came up with this wonderful inquiry about Nietzsche and Buddha?
Well, that's a young book. When I look back at it, I said, okay, I can see what you're trying to do. It's a young book, but I'm not alone in doing that. There is a writer in the States, Daniel Chappelle, who made that same connection. And is the connection that I made is between Nietzsche and the Buddha as understood and experienced and practiced in the Chan and Zen tradition, in the not so much in the Theravadan. Simply put, I always regarded Nietzsche's experiences as sort of unschooled, spontaneous awakening, spontaneous opening into, you could say, a heightened perception, although the term is a little misleading perhaps. And it's very similar to what the essence of some of the Buddha's message. For example, the experience of the eternal recurrence. He was at the time staying for the summer months in this place by the Lake Silvaplana in Sils Marias in Switzerland. And he had a spontaneous experience of what if this existence, as it is, would recur eternally. All the joys and sorrows, all the relationships, the meetings, the events that happen would recur forever and ever. And he was dismayed by this experience. Later on, Deleuze saw this as a powerful metaphor. Accepting this vision would be accepting to live our existence, our life, with a closer contact with those intensities that you have mentioned earlier. And so, to put it more simply, I think he experienced the fictional nature of the self without any particular spiritual discipline, just by his own dedication to philosophical and inquiry. And I think in the Buddha there is something similar. So the result of all this rather sort of high romantic sounding notions is a greater appreciation of life. Am I prepared to live my existence as it is now without the false illusion of hope? And also, can I be open, and what would I do with the experience of realizing that what I call me is to some degree fictional? Those two things are very, very similar. A profound appreciation of existence, of life as it is, and a very deconstructing, unsettling perception of the self. Those are two of the things. There are other strands, and certainly with Zen being traditionally an approach that is very ambivalent, very poetic, and very iconoclastic. So the serenity of the Buddha within the Zen tradition, serenity would be too complacent. You would have to move beyond that and not settle. And with Nietzsche, it's the same. This is the other element. There is no settling ground. Back to the attachment secure base. There is no safe place. I have reached this intuition. Okay, it's time to move. To pick up the tent, pack up the thing, and continue. In that Zen, Buddhas through the lenses of the Zen tradition and Nietzsche are very, very similar. It's there's no settling place, no ultimate wisdom. Let's say we have achieved wisdom. Okay, now it's time to lose it because it will become too attached to it. So in that sense, I find it, mind you, again, very unsettling on a existential level, but again, very adventurous. So, and that's the dilemma, perhaps one of the themes that it's emerging today between you and I talking. You might be, tell me what you think. This dilemma between, of course we want to be safe, of course we want to be well, we want to be grounded, but we also want adventure, innovation, exploration. So, okay, how are we going to do those things?
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish that Nietzsche had knew of the practice of Zazen, of sitting meditation. I have a confession. This is going to sound weird. You might want to edit it from this, but I, of course, visited Nietzsche's house in Switzerland. It's now half museum and half you can. I don't know if we can still do that. You can stay like a bed and breakfast. And his room was cordoned off. But I would go early in the morning, 4 a.m., and creep inside his room, kept intact. And I was just sitting there, so I was there. And I felt a mixture of elation, this incredible adventurous spirit. I mean, philosophy never got that adventurous after that. But also the sadness for the loneliness of the endeavor. What he didn't have was a sangha, a community of spiritual adventurers who would support each other.
Yeah, you use the term spiritual supermarket in one of your books, and what a stark contrast with the image of a spiritual adventurer, where you have this kind of supermarket of safety and orientations to community, and we need community, we need belonging. But this path of the nomad, the path of putting on the gear and just leaving the secure base can be a really lonely path. And that there was a pang in my heart that I guess I could call the orphan pang, where you're orienting me to a kind of orphan aspect of my psyche, that because I hear you experiencing Nietzsche in that way, I experience you in community as an orphan. And that makes me feel a little bit less lonely, but the paradox there is that I feel in community with loneliness.
Again, it really, really hit the nail there. It's so. I think that sadness that I feel, I don't know if you felt in relation to that, in this condition of becoming orphan, is an important experience, and we shouldn't gloss over it. But the learning that comes, and we are talking, it could be literal being orphan, not having parents at a young age, or it could be the sense of existential sense of not having a real belonging. It can be also a rich experience. can be also experience that prompts us to use or discover our resources. There is that notion in Deleuze and Guattari, becoming orphan. And there is something similar, and it's similar to that what we talked about earlier. Again, this emphasis on the importance of that particular existential experience. And when I say existential, in the sense, I'm not glamorizing the sadness of the lonely adventure, because that could be a trap as well, because then it becomes very an egoic state that I am special and particular. Look at these guys, doing their thing in their little tribes, whereas me, I'm special. It's not that. It's more a desire for exploration, and say, okay, I often hear this. Some people say the groups I belong to, the friends I have, the thing we have in common, there is something missing. I feel so. My intervention is usually, what about creating your own club, your own tribe? Because there is always maybe it's my belief, in a sense. Maybe I should own it as a belief. There is a possibility of complicity, correspondence. I don't know what to call it. Perhaps the belonging has to be worked for, rather than something that we take for granted, that we have inherited. Maybe it's part of the work. Where do I belong? How do I? So let me go out and find who are the people who could be my friends in the path. Yeah, I'm just sort of ad-libbing, really.
Yeah, well, that's how I like to riff with you. This is why I like being in dialogue with you. That there's there's paradox of community in a nomadic way of thinking and being and becoming. That a lot of it is this paradox of, like, with all this focus on the secure base and all this focus on parental upbringing, which is a primary obsession in all of psychology, pretty much all of psychology is parenting and parental development and developmental psychology, that it's almost, now it's radically transgressive, I suppose, and iconoclastic in the Nietzschean and the Buddhistic sense, to even say that the orphan and the nomad could have any value at all. And I think that's what we're saying. We're saying we're not trying to be literal about, the literal orphan, that there's something inside the human that is lonely. And no matter how well the parentage is, or how well the culture does ritual practices or something like that, that there's something inside the human that is singular in its multiplicity. That is an orphan. And this is why I love this becoming orphan of Deleuze and Guattari. They basically say that the unconscious is an orphan. So if that's true, if the unconscious is an orphan, and we're focusing and we're being obsessed with establishing parentage, when there never was a parent in the beginning, at the beginning of the universe, like there wasn't some dude with a white beard. I mean, unless you're going to go in classical religious cosmologies, right? But some extraordinary unfolding where there's not singular parents with singular genders, but and the mystery of that, and encountering the mystery of that, is kind of mind-blowing, right?
Yeah,
and I can see, like, why there's religious traditions to kind of reduce it to world parents or deities or whatever, because of this archetype in the unconscious that's just desperately looking for the parents.
So a journey from monad, this kind of thing comes from Leibniz, this sort of atomized unit that I supposedly am, monad, to nomad, to moving, becoming it. You know that famous quip or phrase from Simone de Beauvoir, one is usually impersonal in French, one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. Becomes, one is not, you could say one is not born a man, one becomes a man, one becomes whatever. And becoming has this kind of nomadic element. There's constant movement. It's not like we are fixed. And although there is a necessary, I think you described it in a poignant way, there is no getting away from some kind of inherent loneliness, that it can't be simply appeased. But it's also true that in the movement of nomadic movement, we find assemblages, we find connections. And I love Nietzsche's description of a community. He says, community with others is ideally would be a form of shared blindness. Blindness, and also blindness is a metaphor they also used in Zen a lot, and in deep unknowing. It's not the common ignorance that if I go to the shopping mall, the gadget will give me happiness, or the common delusion. Let's say that I guess we all certainly I partake at times, but more a deep ease with unknowing, blindness in that sense, and a shared sense of that we can relax together, that we are, you could say, seekers in some way, but we know that we don't really know, that we can't know. It's such a relief and such a sort of community in that.
Yeah, it reminds me of a old spiritual teacher that I used to have. He calls it the Braille method.
Okay.
That like we're like a community of brailing, a community of brailers, where we're just you and I here, we're talking and we're feeling into things, and I'm just getting the tingles all over my body because I do feel that community with you as we kind of braille into the unknown. And as soon as you have a solid answer, like science tries to pose so many solid answers, and there's some good things like like if I had a rupture in my aorta, it would be useful to have some certainty about what to do.
Indeed.
I mean,
Indeed.
that's useful. That's useful.
So
but like when it comes to the great wonders of becoming, just having, a kind of ready-made or cookie cutter answers is very unsatisfying to me. It's I really like this a community of the unknown, a community of brailers, and I also really like this phrase monad to nomad, which is kind of a tongue twister. Yeah. I try if we could try to say it 5 times fast, or you could. Do you still play rock music, by the way?
Well, funny you should mention that. I gave up doing it seriously for a long time. But on Thursday, I had my guitar repaired. Somebody said, you should take care of this guitar. It's such a good piece of, an instrument. So I repaired it, and I'm in contact with some friends, musicians, and I decided to do my book launch for that book to celebrate it by having a discussion with colleagues, but also play some music and play some songs. And I
Awesome.
don't know, fingers crossed. Let's see where it
Well,
goes.
well, congratulations on that, picking up the guitar again.
you.
I just love the creative arts as a way to express the intensities, beyond beliefs and beyond this idea of the secure base, but to just express the
Yeah.
powers of becoming. And I was thinking, what would it be like to kind of do a riff and sing a song about monad to nomad? Um, and
Yeah.
the stretch, Manu, that I'm thinking about now, this might be quite a stretch. I'm plucking out a pretty technical piece from your writing now. So this is a stretch. We'll see if it brings us anywhere. But you write about a musical term when you're talking about loosening the constraints of identity structures that can narrow and capture. You talk about the fugue, the concept, and you have a wonderful line called that says something like the funny bone of the fugue. And you're making a musical reference. You know what I'm talking about here?
Yeah.
You're making a musical reference to
Yeah.
the fugue, and I think it's extraordinary. It
Okay.
took me on a YouTube swirl, and I just really enjoyed that. Can we stretch a little bit and see what we can do with the fugue and how that applies to what we're talking about?
So I suspect that I might be suffering from what I won't go into the history of cryptomnesia. Sometimes absorb ideas, I come steal them, and then I forgot where I got them from. I suspect monad to nomad must be somewhere in Deleuze. Okay, and fugue on a bone. It was a title of a short story by an acquaintance, the landlady of somebody I knew and I met, a very, very interesting woman. She wrote this wonderful short story, and he had that image, and I probably pinched it from there, or something to that. Do you know the word pinched in?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean,
So
what
I
is it?
don't
The
know.
statement that the good artist
But,
borrows and the great artist steals.
yes, I think it's TSA.
And it just comes through how it comes through, and then you move on. So
Yeah,
I knew it was a stretch, but let's see where it brings us now.
no, but
It's
I love the
yeah.
fugue. I mean, the fugue. I wish I had more classical knowledge to actually, but I suspect there is something very important in that. I would say, and musical metaphors are very, very rich. And okay, there's something about people say, oh, so Nietzsche is all about becoming. So there is no sense of ontology, there's no sense of being. Well, there is. If we could have a musical ontology, if music will be a model for describing being, for describing something that actually is never static, constantly moves, then music is very close to it. And the way music touches you and affects, moves from one body to another, the music of our speech, you could say, or the music that it's in the spoken, whether it's poetry or so, there is something that is definitely worth exploring, and certainly the pleasure, the joy of playing music and having. For me, this was to renew this interest because a friend invited me to the birthday party. There were the musicians. There was a guitar. I was reluctant. So I haven't practiced forever. Okay, let's try. We started jamming, improvising, and also started improvising with words, and it was so exciting. And that joy, that incredible pleasure, and to have people respond. My God, there's nothing like it. So there is something maybe that all of what I try to say sometime with words in writing or my teaching, facilitating is an attempt to capture an experience that is, you could say, ineffable. Maybe ineffable is too sort of high sounding, but that avoids capture. That it's you're feeling it. It's there. And some people have theorized it so beautifully. Think of Laplanche. He said, okay, the parents, the caregivers give us a enigmatic message. They convey something about their being, their unconscious life. we absorb it. We don't know what it is. We grow up, and then we try and express it. And he gives the example of a saxophonist. The saxophonist plays this tune. Maybe there is improvises on a particular riff and so forth. And somebody in the audience gets the shivers and gets without being able to explain what it is. And that is almost like the saxophonist has been a child, has received this enigmatic message from their parent that has transmuted and moved into music, and it plays on this particular night in this club, and somebody gets it. That's wonderful. If only, but if only, one could do that with words, with being inspired. Maybe that's what inspiration means. I don't know. But there's something.
I think that's what I think. Yeah. I think there's a music to language, and in my book, I talk about the evolutionary development of language, and that there's one theorist that basically says that the origins of language, human language development, are closer to birdsong than meaning making. And so that makes sense. The same thing in developmental psychology. This is maybe where it circles back, where there's a song. There's a song between the mother and the child, or between the caregiver and the child. And it has to do with, a kind of crescendo and decrescendos and improvisation. And it's a music of affect. It's a music of intensity. It's a music of amplifying positive states and self-regulating or co-regulating states where we start to get mutually overwhelmed. Yeah. So I do think the musical metaphor is quite powerful. I think that when I'm thinking about fugue, I kind of vaguely remember where I went when I read that in your book, and from what I can recall, the meaning making that I was attributing to it was that a fugue is kind of like a refrain, or like a repetitive element in the music that keeps on getting repeated. But in the masters of fugue, I think it was Bach. I think Bach was the master of fugue.
Yes.
There's this extraordinary capacity to have a multiplicity of refrains that are tied together in complexity. The refrains maintain a type of identity through the refraining process, but it's all held together in a really complex, rhythmic unfolding that has improvisational elements, but has deep structure in term. And I just think this is so wonderful because, Deleuze writes a whole paragraph about refrains. And I'm thinking, the great traditions, the spiritual traditions on planet Earth, or traditions altogether, are a type of refrain in this musical metaphor thing. Like, they're the refrains that human beings keep on coming back to in terms of meaning making. But like, when refrains are done too often, they become rigid and stereotyped, and they lack that sort of adventuresome element where there's innovation and there's the creation of new refrains and new ways of combining refrains.
I love that. And it reminded me, there is a section, somebody wrote a transcript of this informal conversation Deleuze had about bird songs and connects it with so many other things. It's beautiful the way you put it. It reminds me of that what you said about fugue. It reminds me of this notion of polyphony music, polyphony in the psyche, and that's what I'm trying to work at the moment. The working title for my new book is In Praise of Pandemonium. Pandemonium.
Can you say that again?
In Praise of Pandemonium. And Pandemonium has this link with John Milton and hell, the assembly of the devils or the rebels.
Well, and also, of course, it shares the base word for pandemic and pansexuality.
Yeah.
And the base word essentially is the ancient god Pan,
Yeah.
right?
Indeed.
Who Nietzsche proclaimed, right, that
Well,
ancient
thanks
god
for
is
that.
dead.
Thanks for the reminder. It's good. I was thinking, yes, I
Yeah.
was thinking those terms, and but Pan, that escapes me. And of course, I would go to Dionysus, but we are in the same terrain there. And of course, the more diamonds, more, again, multiplicity. If there is maybe one, I don't know if we can say that, but if there is one theme that comes in and out of this, is the importance to affirm against the dominant view the inherent multiplicity of who we are. Why there is so much fear over the fact that we are not one monad, atomized thing. We are many. Anyway, that's what I
Yeah.
will go with that.
Well, and it reminds me, because I'm thinking other pairing with monad would be monad and multiplicity. So that we could form a triad of monad, nomad, and multiplicity.
Okay.
And I'm appreciating also our discussion in our earlier conversation about Zen koan.
Yeah.
And because I like to, when I'm supervising training clinicians that are training and teaching psychology students, one of the things that I'm deliberately wanting to teach is paradox tolerance. The capacity to tolerate paradox. And that's one of the things I love about the Zen tradition and how you described it. And before you told me, I didn't know this, that like the early and the foundation koan in the Zen tradition is just this simple statement: what is this? And I love that because it doesn't, it's not a rigid thing. It kind of invokes a curiosity. It invokes a line of flight that doesn't, sort of crystallize in a refrain and a tradition for too long, right? It indicates, hey, let's just keep on asking that question.
And this is so important because it's not who am I, which, okay, could be an interesting one, but it's already who am I? I mean, the thing is, I am thrown into this, whether I like it or not. I wake up in the morning, boom, here I am. So what is this? I don't know if you came to the States, there's a beautiful new film by Wim Wenders, called Perfect Days. And I think a lot of it is about that. It's the daily life of a Tokyo toilet cleaner every day, but his sense of commitment to the work and his sense of joy and wonder. I mean, it's an incredible film. So there is something to that. And I am more and more coming back to some of the Zen tradition. I have dusted off my old robe, and I will go to a formal retreat soon with some friends and teachers, and I'll facilitate a retreat in the autumn in Devon, a week retreat, Zen retreat. So it's almost like, for me, it's honoring, remembering that tradition, all it taught me. And it's another, we'll see where it takes me. Where it takes me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about where I was first introduced to you, which is this section in your writing called How to Avoid Capture. And when you're discussing ecotherapy, actually, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Thinking about this principle, I like the word rewilding. You see that in the eco-psychology community. And I'd really like to Well, how about this? How about I just read off your quote
Okay.
that first got me excited about having a discussion with you.
Okay.
And it's in this section called "How to Avoid Capture." I think it really, kind of orients us to this paradox of secure base versus adventure. That sometimes when you over focus right on the secure base, you miss the wildness and wonder. So this is how to avoid capture from Manu. Animal inspiration instructs us on how to survive the primal mom and dad theater without becoming irretrievably fucked up. Becoming animal is a way to endure the constraints of the Oedipal family. Here, creativity is survival and at one with instinct, for the two are inextricably entwined. This vision calls for nothing less than a feral philosophy, for the revitalization of wild animal energy, which has waned while suffering centuries of over-civilizing ideologies and institutions. You hit the nail on the head with that one, Manu.
Okay. I have to acknowledge the book that really, really got me, opened my mind to this, and it's Brian Masumi, What Animals Teach Us About Politics. That's the book that opened the gate for me on this. So I went into this and escaping the Oedipal cage. Oh my goodness. This is an ongoing thing because I'm not interested. Okay, I am interested. There's something very rich and in the thinking, in Freud, the Oedipal cage, mom and dad, and Jim Morrison, father, I want to kill you, mother, I want you. Okay, my God, I grew up with stuff. I mean, it was not long before my time, but I was, anyway. Yes, that's good, that's great. It's intense. But I'm interested so much in Oedipus. I'm interested in the Sphinx. The Sphinx.
Yeah.
And the Sphinx
the Sphinx
is animal. And it's human. And it's when you face the Sphinx, if you don't respond to the koan, you die. If you don't solve the riddle, the enigma, you die. So for me that's an area that I got really excited about, and then I let it rest because it was almost like, wow, okay, where am I going with this? So the one thing that I remember from that sort of inquiry, and it's still true today, wouldn't it be nice to have a training, let's say philosophical training, let's say a psychotherapeutic training, a spiritual training, which encourages the sophisticated development of becoming animal. So people say animal as going to a lower state of so-called basic instinct or so-called, sort of a lack of intelligence. But here I think a feral philosophy would mean to acknowledge the continuum, human-animal, whilst accepting and appreciating the specificity of the human. It's not like we are all the same with birds and other living beings. Acknowledging the specificity and reconsidering this facile division between instinctual. The instinct would be something basic, and then the more intelligent and refined capacity attribute in the human, allegedly. And it would mean reconsidering instinct as a highly intelligent and sophisticated way to respond to existence, to the world, which we have forgotten. And also, I'm also careful because I don't want to go back into, going back to some kind of primordial animal instinct. I think I'm very suspicious of that too. And perhaps I'm literally thinking aloud here. I don't know. Let's see if where it takes us. Okay. Perhaps we could acknowledge feral philosophy alongside the cyborg, the mutation into that the human can go into some. So the point is, at heart, we have something that Foucault made it very clear. The moment we say God is dead, the human is also dead. It doesn't mean dead, but it means we understand that the delimitation and boundary we call human are much more fluid. So it moves and connects with the animal, and which we are. And it also moves and connects with the other dimension, the sophisticated technology, which then the question becomes how to use all this movement, nomadic movement, for innovation. We are back to that. There would be the if there is an ethics here, the ethics is, are we doing it in order to become more coercive or experience, or to expand experience? And in that, I'm very sort of tickled, provoked by the work of Donna Haraway as well. And
yes.
And I can okay. For me, that's good because it confirms again a Deleuzian profound insight. We are all on the same plane of immanence, and that really cuts through this whole pretense that we are the superior kings and queens of existence, which is not true. And so, yes, I mean, I would have to revisit that, which is something that I written a while ago, and reconsider. But I suspect there's so much more in there. And it would take us into other areas, like I mentioned Bhutto, the practice of Bhutto. There becomes very embodied. When you start allowing something to emerge, is this animal or human? And the other division that to consider, and it's almost kind of weird just to mention it. If it's true that the division between animal and human, for instance, or human and cyborg is not that clear cut, what about the division between the living and the dead? What about the division between the so-called inert matter and alive matter? So we could take us into all sorts of realms. So maybe.
I'm wondering if by chance you might have run into a writer named Andrew Pickering.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, so Andrew Pickering, I'm thinking of an article that he wrote called Cyborg Spirituality.
Okay.
Cyborg spirituality. And I'm just wanting to fold that into the dough that we're working on here, just because I just love the term, and I love how you threw in the spice of the cyborg, because there can be an othering of cybernetics and the robots or whatever as being, somehow anti-nature. And so I just love how you hold out the image of the Sphinx as a image that you prefer over the Oedipal image. Now, of course, then how you added, the Sphinx as an animal, but hey, what about the cyborg element being grafted onto the Sphinx? Then we have a more modern image of the Sphinx.
I like it.
Wow. Which I just think we could just have an amazing conversation about. Maybe we're doing it now. I think we're doing it now, where so Oedipus had to solve the riddle of the Sphinx, right? At this stage, I can't remember if he's blinded. I think he's not blinded at this stage.
No.
He's not blinded at this
he
stage.
doesn't know.
Eventually he ends up being.
He doesn't know who he is yet.
Yeah, eventually he ends up blinded, so he becomes a member of the Brailer community, that we're talking about. But when he encounters the Sphinx, he answers the Sphinx with this interpretation, basically this humanistic interpretation that, a man moves from these stages of being from 4 legs to 3 legs to 2 legs to 3 legs, 4 legs to 2 legs to 3 legs. Yep, that's it. And essentially his answer to the Sphinx is man. And and therefore you have this anthropocentric kind of capture of the multiplicity of the beast, an anthropocentric capture, which actually you mentioned Haraway, who is just absolutely brilliant. I love her book, even the terminology, staying with the trouble, making kin in the Thulacine. It's just so lovely, where she brings us on these really interesting journeys through, for example, just this idea, for example, that a lot of estrogen is made out of horse pee. And like people, for example, that are taking estrogen are actually imbibing horse genetics. So that the horse is kind of grafting itself onto the human and becoming human, and the human is becoming horse. And it's such a lovely non-anthropocentric way of orienting to the symbol. Now, when you were talking, I got excited. You probably saw how excited I was when you started to talk about the Sphinx. I was like, oh yeah, here we go. And I actually am writing about the Sphinx in the book here.
Oh, wow.
This is an extended passage, so it's a bit of a risk to read an extended passage. But this comes from Deleuze, talking about the Sphinx.
Oh, wow, okay.
Now, when he's talking about the Sphinx, he's doing it from this perspective that is both appreciative and critical of Jung and his followers.
Okay.
Both critical and appreciative of the archetypal framework of things, because there can be a limitation in Deleuze's view, of course, of just saying that, all of us humans have these archetypes, and these are structures that replay over time. Like the Sphinx is a archetype that represents this and this and so on.
Platonic.
So in this passage, he's talking about keeping symbols multiple.
Okay. Oh, wow.
I.e. keeping the symbol of the Sphinx, keeping it multiple, as opposed to reducing it to the human, or reducing it even to the animal aspects that the actual Sphinx is trying to show us, right? Where the actual lion and the actual Sphinx is a combination of a lion and what? An eagle? Remember?
And a woman, I believe. A lion and a woman.
A lion and a woman, and I think it maybe had wings.
I believe.
Okay, the Sphinx is a female figure with the body of the lion, the wings of an eagle, and the tail of a serpent.
Oh my goodness, I forgot that. Oh my God, yeah.
Right? Yeah, but what Deleuze is saying is that the multiplicity and the intensity of the Sphinx gets reduced to man. And then therefore you lose the symbolic power of the actual encounter with the multiplicity. So here's this long passage from Deleuze. Consider the Sphinx's riddle. It would be rather foolish to see this as 3 linked parts whose final response would be man. It comes to life, on the contrary, only if one feels the 3 groups of images in the process of whirling around the most mysterious point of man. images of the animal child, then those of the creature on two paws, or a monkey, or a bird, or a frog, and then those of the unknown beast on three paws from beyond the seas and deserts. This is precisely what the symbol is. It has neither beginning nor end. It does not lead us anywhere, and above all, it has no final point, nor even stages. It is always in the middle, in the midst of things, between things. It has only a milieu, milieus that are ever more profound. The symbol is a maelstrom. It makes us whirl about until it produces that intense state out of which the solution, the decision, emerges.
Oh, very beautiful. Very much. Wow. Very much. Very helpful, very clarifying of this whole conversation. Yeah. Yeah.
We better find a secure base, Manu, after all that wild intensity.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. It reminded me of that. Yeah, the other wolf man, that thing about there are many wolves in the dream. Freud analyzed Deleuze says, and it's not a wolf man, there's a multiplicity, there is a pack. Wolves are always in a pack. And so forth. It's so beautiful. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that there's something, and he talks about contagion when he's talking about the pack. And, like there's this reality in evolution where, similar to what Haraway is talking about, that nature interpenetrates with itself.
Yeah.
Nature is the great fold, as Foucault would say, right? Nature is the great fold, and there's a constant transfer of genetic material, and there's contagion, and there's viruses that become, for example, the intelligence that shapes the placenta of the mammal. So to just say all viruses are other and they're not part of life, well, they're part of this interpenetrating mix-up, this great fold of becoming that life is.
And how dangerous it would be to, I remember this anthropologist, the British anthropologist, I think her name is, I forget the name, she wrote a book about this obsession with purity, with maintaining this pristine, untouched state in our bodies, and this fear of contagion, and how dangerous that is. Was it Mary Douglas? Yeah. I forget the name. I don't know.
I think it's really important. I think this is one of the things that ties it all together, a kind of primitive fear of contagion. Like we were talking before about trauma.
Yeah.
And trauma discourse. And I often think that the trauma community has a kind of strange version of the Garden of Eden. That there's a kind of fantasy in there that there was a time, and this is a distinctive discourse than people that have been horribly abused. Okay?
Of course.
I'm talking about the narrative. I just wanted to put that in there as a kind of important piece to keep in the dough. That in the actual narrative, baked into the narrative, is a kind of Eden imagery. That before the contagion came, before the horrible thing that ruined it all, the great evil coming into the garden, or you see it in so many world creation mythologies, before that horrible contagion happened, there was a pristine and perfect garden that we need to return to. And that, to me, is the shadow of the secure base thing, like as if we could create a space that is watertight and perfectly clean, where all of the language is perfectly clean and all of the interaction is perfectly manicured and curated and perfectly clean, as if everything is edited perfectly, like it seems like and maybe we can drill down again into this term microfascism and define it and talk about how that applies to this contagion thing and this obsession with security and safety.
I'm very much inspired by cinema. So I've seen this, I mentioned Wim Wenders' Perfect Days. And there's another film by Jonathan Glazer, and it's called The Zone of Interest. And it starts with, it's set in the 1930s in Poland, I believe. And there is this German family having this wonderful picnic in this, by a lake. There's this beautiful surroundings. They are bathing, they're having a picnic, they're laughing, they're healthy. The wife cultivates her own vegetables and produce. It's all wonderful, and the return to nature, return to this purity. And then slowly the film, it's very strange film in a sense. You realize what daddy's job is. He's the head of a concentration camp. We are during the Nazi period, and he's literally, then you slowly zooms out and realize this beautiful idyllic house, this dream house of return to nature, which was a narrative in Nazi Germany, in the Nazi ideology. The house is literally next to a concentration camp, and you see smoke coming out of the chimney, and you hear sounds, but life continues, and it's just it's a happy family living the dream of nature, uncontaminated, and so forth. The film evolves. It's incredibly subtle but devastating in the way it really presents this whole scenario. So it's an extreme example, of course, but I think there is something here about the dream, the illusion, rather, the fantasy of purity, and how dangerous that is if you extend it to transcultural ethnic situation. Okay, there's always this fear that particular ethnic group is going to contaminate me. It's going to even Heidegger, he would talk about the Jews as contaminating the purity of the European civilization, which we have inherited from the Greeks. And it would bring a mishmash of culture, a lack of commitment to the soil, to the, again, this idea of a secure, rooted, this is my land, this is my identity, this is my family, my group. And as long as we keep inoculated, this reminds me, I'm just remembering a very interesting American academic, Eula Biss. She wrote a book on inoculation before the pandemic, and she goes into various forms. She describes the myth of vampires, and then through history, the smallpox and the certain illnesses through history, her own fear as a mother when the child was born, and she dwells very deeply into this notion that we understand our body as a kind of uncontaminated terrain, that it has to be kept protected from external. The fear is from the external, from the contagion, as you say. Where am I going with this? I think, yes, it's an interesting one. And to forget that we are inhabited by all sorts of lives. They have their own becomings, they have their own agendas and their own. So it's a very, very rich, and I see it in my work as a psychotherapist. The client often comes already with a preconception. I was going to say brainwashed, but that I have to protect myself and help me create this shield. And we know what happens when we create a shield. We also imprison ourselves. And so we're back to that.
It's a common, it's a common fantasy in so-called energy psychologies, right? That we need to really just be busy protecting ourselves all the time, and I think boundary formation can be quite useful, but then when it becomes a prison, it's not useful. I was thinking about an article that I ran into, just an extraordinary article, a scientific article, that was posing the idea that for example, that Spinoza had tuberculosis, and shared that with Deleuze. And that tuberculosis, that what used to be known as the White Plague, was actually associated with human creativity. And that the contagion of the actual tuberculosis bacteria actually changed the brain, and not all people that get tuberculosis are subject to death and the horrible things that it does. Some people can live a really creative life, and the theory in this article is that the bacteria goes into the microbiome in the gut and in the brain and creates new assemblages, new ways of building neurons, and new ways of, and so there was an association that was made between this contagion and the sort of brilliance that we see in master philosophers like Spinoza. And isn't that interesting, right? And that actually Deleuze had tuberculosis as well.
Yes, it reminds me of this beautiful quote by Deleuze. Isn't it strange to notice in the life of great thinkers? I think he was thinking of Nietzsche. This really vulnerable core, but also an incredible creativity and incredible strength. What he calls after Nietzsche the great help. I think it's the book on Nietzsche, on Nietzsche and philosophy. That he says how strange are these great thinkers, and of course there was the same for him, and that same desire to create and innovate and create so many new ideas for philosophy. Was also, may I add, the same vital force in the end made him decide to end it.
Yeah.
Which we shouldn't, I don't think we should judge as something necessarily negative or bad. It's the same. I mean, the circumstances are particular, life would become unbearable. But what touches me is this combination of frailty and incredible creative power. So it's similar to what you were saying, in a sense. The great help.
Yeah.
What is the great help? The human Mensch. Nietzsche would say the human Mensch is not Superman, is actually more like a state of being where you reach this threshold of the human and open to another perception. It's a very vulnerable place. And in Japanese, they say the tallest tree gets the storm.
Yeah. Well, and it's almost like a koan or a paradox where you have, I say things in class like vulnerability is a power. And I also say things like, isn't it just such a paradox that all of life, including human life, is both deeply fragile and also very resilient?
Yeah.
And I think we're in the territory of this, and there's a lot of these, in this trauma narrative, you have this excessive orientation towards the fragile, as opposed to the robustness. But then you lose on the other side if you assume too much robustness, right? So that you really see this dynamic paradox prop up again.
Yeah. Yeah. How wonderful. I would love to have to hear this back, because your reference is so rich. I want to listen to it and make notes and see where it takes me and see if I can develop some of these things. So I would.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, me too, for sure. It's been a ride. I want to cover one or two more things before we close. Are you okay with that? Okay. One of them is I want to come back to almost like a refrain, this idea of microfascism, and maybe it can be coupled with the other thing I want to talk about, which is this idea that cuts to the quick in my profession, which is somatic psychology. Okay, I'm a somatic psychology specialist because we have to specialize these days, right?
Sure.
Trauma resolution specialist, somatic psychology specialist. But one of the things that cuts to the quick about all this stuff is this issue of the felt sense. Okay. And this kind of unassailable truth of the felt sense.
Yeah.
Like the felt sense is, like when we're tracking the affects and the emotions, the sensations that are happening in our body, just saying this for our audience, like what's happening in the here and now in the body. But there can be this sense, almost like this absolute truth. Like
yes,
when I sense that, like I'm a bit hungry right now. And you're right?
Yeah.
Okay. That there's an absolute truth to it that can never be challenged.
Yeah.
And the body keeps the score is great, and you write about that. The body keeps the score as if it's like some accountant's
resentment
ledger or something. Resentment machine or an accountant's ledger or something like that, and all of those are just kind of unassailable truths.
I think that meant well.
Could we relate that to microfascism? Yeah. Could we relate that to microfascism?
Okay, we can try. But I think the important thing to remember that is, what a pity that the great insight of the unconscious. I mean, insight. It was long in coming. It was already there in Nietzsche, long before Freud. Became such a simplified notion that now even psychoanalysts want to fumigate it. Want to sort of. Here's the key word: translate it. Okay, translation. Let's use the psychoanalytic language for a moment. Translation of unconscious material is a form of coercion. The language of the unconscious, or let's say the language of affect, the language of the rich life that comes through from existence into our psyche, in the way we dream and feel, our motivations, and so forth, are really, really untranslatable. We need to approach it with a different mode. That's why I think those guys, like Freud, were onto something when they started talking about free association, which is not disappeared. Nobody does that. Nobody. Everybody tries to turn it into a useful thing to get on and be well and join your reserved place in the traffic jam sort of thing. So for me, the felt sense, I suspect Gendling view, because it was based on, it came from phenomenology, came from philosophy, was a little more nuanced and a little more open to ambivalence, I suspect. But the way it has become now, felt sense is a translation, hence an oversimplification, a betrayal. In Italian we say tradurre e tradire. To translate is to betray. And also to coerce. All of this that I am going through, we have to find and check and look and explore. We have to find a translation and a felt sense that says, this is what I am feeling. This is the truth of what I'm feeling. And that's such a shortcut and such a pity, because, again, in Deleuzean terms, it would reduce the multiplicity into univocity, whatever the word is, into a one way to understand things, because of our very human urge to apprehend, to grasp, to want an explanation, to want the kind of closure, and so we know. I have the felt sense. I found the truth. Whereas chances are, what we have found is another enigma. Okay, we have explored the complexity of what I'm feeling. I'm not sure. I have this. Oh, I think this is it. This is it for now, but very likely is another enigma which will need to be unraveled. So there is a coercive drive. And I think we can try and link it to microfascism. But before we do that, I said this is an impossible task, because the very nature of the psych world, the whole psychology, psychotherapeutic, etc. endeavor is based on a premise which somebody like Nietzsche would call reactive. Reactive. You want to simplify, turn into clear-cut formulas what is in essence a bunch of hieroglyphs which are there to deepen the perplexity, deepen the inquiry. So in a way, I'm a little more, maybe I'm getting older, I'm a little more sympathetic to this desire to want to get a grasp and say, okay, I got it. This is what it is. Okay. So it doesn't have to be a problem unless it becomes, as it often happens with practitioners, and I'm talking about falling out with colleagues over this. Vital focusing colleague for whom the felt sense is the be all and end all, and I say, okay, so I appreciate you have a particular perspective and a particular philosophy, and they would say, I don't have a perspective and philosophy. This is how things truly are, and that's when I hear that, I say, okay, good luck to you. And I'm not suggesting that is what microfascism is. Mm-hmm. And historically, we have to own the fact that it comes from Guattari, from some of his wonderful writings. And the part that interests me, because of the raging debates in this country about gender, the gender wars and transgender and feminist and trans and so forth, the part that interests me when he connects microfascism to the understanding of what goes on in the family, according to a very narrow, coercive narrative, which essentially nowadays we would say is a propaganda for the heteronormative view, and you could find it even in wonderful, inspiring, intelligent people like Lacan. In Lacan, you had the sense of the name of the father. That's the center around which the law and the way we understand language and the unconscious revolves. So I think it has many ramifications. On a simple level, you could say the fundamentals. We are back to Oedipus, the Oedipal family, the nuclear family. There is something which structurally, not because people are evil or bad or anything. It's simply there's something in the structure which is intrinsically coercive. And the funny thing, there's a great debate at the moment in some circles here, psychotherapeutic circles, about how can we bring more the social, the political into the clinic. How can we not shy away from issues like Gaza, in this country, Brexit, or disagreements with clients and so forth. And usually it boils down to we should be good clinicians, but we should also be open to the world, and perhaps join the odd march and be a bit of an activist and be on the right side of history, which all that I support. But nobody questions some of the roots of where politics, where psychotherapy and the psychological understanding can help us understand that artificial division between the so-called private domain and the public domain. And it all starts in the family. I mean, I don't want to make it too big, but I remember in Mussolini's time, my parents were young people during the 20 year of the fascist regime. The formula, which is the formula of the far right in Italy too, is God, homeland, and family. And anything that is a contagion to the family, homosexuality, the trans, what's the fear there? That the species will not reproduce, but maybe, who knows, maybe that's another thing we could open. I mean, we are an interesting species. Perhaps we're a little bit overrated. And what if the species doesn't reproduce? So what? So what? So on a basic level, I understand the notion from Guattari as the micro element, the interrelational, the familiar, what starts and breeds in the family, even when, of course, there are loving people, loving parents, but the structure as such, strangely, still remains. I don't know many practitioners who are who present a critique of that, and perhaps we have gone through a phase where the many experimental communes and various groups, and which I partook for many years, there's been a backlash. So there is perhaps a return to the kind of nuclear family and marriage, etc. But it's an interesting one, because maybe it goes back to what you were saying about this sort of fixation with the secure base. So I'm ambivalent about it. I want to acknowledge the human need, my own need for to have a home, right?
Yeah.
To feel at
Yeah,
home with one I love, with people are close to me, and so forth. At the same time, there might be a seed in there of something very coercive, because already others, what's external to us, and imagines a threat. It might not be real, That's where I would go with it. It's a work in progress for me at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, Guattari was talking at the time when it was very influential in the 1970s in the student movement that I was very much part of. There was a sense, we can really change things here. And it hasn't quite happened. But I think the dream, the desire, back to your capital D, I think is still valid to try out other models,
When I was listening to your beautiful articulations, I found myself having a felt sense in my heart. And out of that felt sense in my heart, the phrase arose, home is having a shared language.
I love that.
And so you're home to me in that way, because it really feels like we have a shared language. And having a shared language and having a home, and language itself is the good and the wonderful, but it also can slide into the horrible, where language becomes worse than a virus, worse than a contagion. And I think in many ways, we are beset on all sides by language issues. And that, because, Barnaby Barrett, he's one of the folks that I'm sure you'll love, because it feels like home is having a shared language. And he has a very similar critique of some of the somatic psychologies out there, even though he's a somatic psychology writer. Okay. And he has a piece that's a writing piece that's Deleuzian in the sense, but he's basically saying that, wait, let's back up a little bit about Oedipus and Oedipality and incest taboos and stuff. Wait, hang on a second. This is an issue of representational language. That the Oedipal complex is the birth of representational language. The birth of the ancient deities, for example. You say that they're the mother and the father of the culture. You have the birth of language. Once you have the birth of language, you have a shared home in a shared language. But then the shadow of that, of course, is at least twofold. One is that you cut off and reduce whatever, like you were talking about before, whatever it is that you're representing, whether it's the felt sense or the powers of the universe. Okay. One is that you reduce that into a word or an image or a symbol. And then the other is that there's other people in other tribes that have another language. Which, and then so I'm talking about ethnocentrism. I'm talking about the shadows and the horrors of genocide. That, that it's essentially a problem of language. And I think that's what Deleuze and everybody is on about, and what Foucault was on about, that microfascism is a way of trying to clone and propagate whatever language you think is the best, whatever language of meaning making, whatever language of whatever it is, and try to impose that code onto other people. And you're either with us or you're against us.
It reminds me of something that preoccupied me when I wrote a book called Spectre of the Stranger. And it's about the multiple narratives that then became the Bible, and how, for some reason, some narratives became the orthodox narrative. For instance, nomadism was considered a bad thing, even though it was people who would settle and begin owning the land and having property and things who would worship false gods. And also how some of the narratives, I remember the story, was it Sarah? I don't remember. But there was something about, anyway, there was something about a particular part in the Bible, which I will have to look back again. The fear of tribes who would, as you were saying, speak a different language, worship the wrong God. And the fear of being contaminated by those wrong ideas. And I always find it very puzzling and very interesting what was the process through which one narrative then became the dominant narrative. So it became one God, one right way of doing things, and all the others got either assimilated or turned into proverbs as a kind of a cautionary tale. What is to be avoided? It just reminded me that I think it's very important, this thing about language, and I understand the way you use it in a very broad sense, in the sense of how we understand our perceptions and how we construct our reality, our world.
Yeah. Well, and it's the paradox of it. Language can be seen as the home of our belonging, and it can also be seen as a prison, and you know, the place where atrocities take place.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, in our last conversation we talked about exploding language.
Yeah.
Like, just, you know, and where would that leave us if we exploded language and we're just, like, for example, running a musical ontology where, yeah, there's content in terms of what we're saying, you and I, but there's a song underneath it that relates us, that makes us feel in our guts that we're a member of the same community. It's not the content, it's the song.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's both the content and expression, right? It's the song underneath the language, and then it's the content as well. So
Content and form.
exploding language is an interesting idea. While at the same time holding the paradox that we kind of need language for our belonging.
So it's changing the structure while holding it. It's a kind of again, it reminds of this, the secure base and the line of flight, the knowing the language intimately and playing with it. I mean, also reminds me of what Nietzsche would say about, let's say, the philosophical tradition. It's not that we want to destroy it. He says we have to know it so well that we can start playing with it rather than being shackled by it. Maybe something similar. It's all that we have inherited, all our sense of identity, belonging, and tradition. Can we bring it to dance and to play? So it's the paradox is that we have to know it. Often people misunderstand what I'm trying to express as a kind of iconoclastic for its own sake. But I think because some of this explosion of language will come from people like Virginia Woolf. Now, she's hardly a radical anarchist or how can I say? It's very much, you could say, in many ways, is the voice of has become the tradition. But look at the novels, the language, the way it moves. It's just, it's incredible. And all the innovators of language, Deleuze often talks about Kafka and minoritarian literature. They seem to hint in that direction. Exploding, it doesn't have to be destructive. It could be very, very creative, obviously.
Playing with, I like that as an alternative,
Yeah.
right? Where there's a way to play with language so that it doesn't play us. There's a way to, for example, just to rip, as we orient to completion here, to throw in that the computer language is also a language that is posited as being other than animal and other than nature. But it could just be that, hey, this is just another language that we can play with rather than have it play us.
This is crucial because often, particularly my existential colleagues, rely on Heidegger. There's this sort of hatred and fear of technology as the inauthentic life. I think we have to do something creative with that because we are already in it. And one thing, and maybe another occasion we can talk about, which is very much my current exploration, the thinker who really honed this notion of trans-individuation, Gilbert Simondon. He was a great inspiration for Deleuze, and he's a thinker of technology. But technology in his hands becomes something wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I'm just first steps with his language is so incredibly dense, and so I'm seeing. I feel there is something in there which will be very useful to people like ourselves, people who like this sort of explorations,
it reminds me of somebody into Simondon that came up with the term. I think his name was Yuck Hui. That came up with the term cosmotechnics, which is a quite cool term, and in that tradition that isn't just making technology other, that it's that there's something cosmic about it, and it is as viable as a pathway to a relationship with the great mystery and the great wonders of being and becoming as any other path. Why not? Yeah.
Wonderful.
Great to chat with you again. It's just that, the trickster archetype was with us, and garbling our technology in the beginning, but it all feels right now, doesn't it?
I really enjoy it. I had some moments of real physical response, like a tickling and the
tingling response, that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I love the tingle response. I just one thing about the science, just to tip the hat on the science. Did you know that people that experience the tingle response more often, the goosebump response, are rated higher on the psychological scale called the Big Five personality traits,
Okay.
and they're rated higher in the openness to experience personality trait. So, and the tingle response is almost always equated with feelings of awe and feelings of wonder, and people that feel that tingle response more are higher in openness to experience. And that definitely clocks with me, Manu. It's been a real joy. I've had the tingle response several times in this dialogue, and I hope we can do it again.
Likewise, Brian. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to The Boundless Body with the Somatic Doctor. Please leave a comment, subscribe, and like us on social media.
We're a swarm, we're a colony, we're a multiplicity.
Until next time, be well.